I am live. I'm reading out of Life as Carola. It is Carola who was born on the 4th of May 1510. So it's 16th century. It's a memory of Joan Grant. She lived from 1907 till 1989, and she used to be able to recall her previous incarnations. This is her incarnation as Carola, and she was born as the illegitimate daughter of Lord Griffin. Her and her mother were banished from his castle, and her mother was killed. She joined a convent where she was tortured, and she was rescued by Carlos. She married Carlos, and this is now her as Carola di Ludovici. We are here in the second part of chapter 23, and it is entitled Flail of the Angels. And today is July the 17th, 2023. Flail of the Angels. After I had told Carlos of Lucia, it seemed she had come like an unquiet ghost to rob him of the measure of serenity I had given him. We still talked together of dead philosophers whose dusty manuscripts slept in his library, but even their words brought him no comfort. To him, her tragedy remained a tragedy, and he could not see that it was only a fragment of a mosaic in the pattern of her experience. I searched my dream memory for what might bring back knowledge of the great injustice, of the great justice to his heart. Yet it was in the childhood of Carola I found the key to unlock the prison of his intellect. I was gathering flowers in the cool of a summer evening to set in the marble urns that flanked the chimney in my favourite room, when I said to Carlos, "When I was a child, I went to a fair where there was a troupe of monstrosities. Among them were twin brothers who within the womb had grown into one flesh. They were joined at the waist, turned half away from each other, and one always had to walk sideways, like a crab. They did a shambling dance, or sang in high, cracked voices, and each knew that in his brother's eyes he had never seen, shone an old smouldering hatred of his fellow prisoner. They knew that when either died, he would be the other's murderer, for from his mortifying flesh, slow death would creep to grasp the still beating heart that so long had kept the rhythm of his own. It seems that Lucia was bound to Bernard as were those twins, by a bond of flesh so strong that when he severed it, she died, as surely as if he himself had poisoned her. For a time I thought their bond must have been forged by Satan, but now I know that this was not so. I was told, and it was far from earth I heard it, that such a love is sometimes sent to spur on those who tarry too long beside the path. I call it the flail of the angels." He sighed. "Even your angels carry flails to drive on their unwilling penitents. Carola, it is strange and terrible that you are gentle, should hold so dear your cruel philosophy. Only injustice is cruel, and if we look beyond the outward form of temporal existence, we see there is no injustice." His voice was weary as he said, "The punishment of Lucia was not on earth." I put down my basket and made him sit by me on a bench under the mulberry tree before I answered. "See, there's blood on my fingers where I pricked it on a thorn. Shall I blame the rose for punishing me, or admit that it was I who grasped it carelessly?" "Are you not juggling with words?" "No, for it is the same with all wounds of heart or flesh. It is we who cause them to our own sorrow. Yet this very sorrow is the seed of the corn of experience, from which the living bread is milled. Lucia would not have had that tie with Bernard bound upon her, unless it was necessary for her to learn what it alone could teach her. In the past she refused to listen, many times, to what was said to her in a gentle voice, and even when she had to hear a harsh command, if she had used her own powers, she would have been able to obey, without suffering the pains which come to all who try to escape the destiny they themselves have made. Once she ruled others by their lust to their destruction. Lucia was not young in spirit. She would never have allowed a man to break her pride if she had not been assailed by this strange blindness, which made her see Bernard, whom she used to laugh at for a boaster and a fool, in a form very near to her God. Through his breaking of her pride she has gained the strength that before was never hers, a strength with which she will be able to teach others how to be wise in the age of their own loins. She will show them how best the iron links, forged on the anvil of desire, can be transmuted into the gold threads of the love that receives all, because it demands nothing. Carlos had taken a rose out of my basket and was turning it between his fingers as he said, "It is curious that our language should give us 10 words with which to describe the scent of a rose, and only one for the manifold variations of love. Perhaps it is because even the makers of words find it easier not to look beyond the little world of the senses. If they could see more clearly, they would know that love needs a true priest, or at least a philosopher, to mark even its broad divisions. In every experience there must be some aspect of love, the love that is within us, which will one day fuse with a God from whom it sprang. I see love as a ladder reaching to eternity. He who climbs it must know of every rung, for unless he has known and conquered lust, he cannot transcend the limits of the flesh, to burnish the soul and so perfect the spirit. And lust is evil? Only when it blinds the long in years to their own wisdom, and if they had not scorned that early rung, by which they should have grown strong in their youth, they would not be thus blinded in their age. Each rung of the ladder, rising from earth to heaven, must in its turn be climbed. Near its foot is a wolf, scenting its mate through the darkness, at its head a man about to enter paradise. Yet while they climb, they are part of the same whole, and when the climb is past, they will still be one with God. And when Carlos and I returned to the house, I was his sole companion, for the memory of Lucia no longer walked with him. Chapter 24. La Lage. In the summer of the following year there were rumours of plague in Perugia, so Carlos took me to his house, which lay 3 days' journey in the hills to the northeast. Although it was still early in July, I found it very hot inside the travelling coach. The 2 windows were covered by leather curtains to keep out the dust, and the upholstery had the stale smell of musty cloth. The long sleeves of my purple dress were tight, and the silver threads of the embroidery on my shoes had rubbed through the lining and chafed my toes. As we lurched over the deep ruts, I tried not to think that an ox cart, where one could lie down in the straw and sleep, was more comfortable than riding in a coach, nor to remember the freedom of coarse shifts and bare feet. It was the first time I stayed at an inn since Petruchio died. Everything was ready to welcome us, the innkeeper bowing and his wife in his newly starched cap curtsying in the background, for Carlos had sent a servant to prepare for our arrival. There were fresh rushes strewn on the floor of our room. For dinner we had their best wine with roasted capons, followed by a syllabub, warm and very sweet. The innkeeper's wife was anxious about my comfort, for she believed me to be a great lady. I thought how horrified she would be if I told her I was used to sleeping in the lofts over inn stables. As I had no maidservant with me, Anna having gone ahead to make ready the house, the woman asked that she might attend me when I prepared for bed. I tried not to hurt her by my refusal, but I saw she was surprised. I could not tell her that none save Anna might see me naked, for my scars had not yet faded, and anyone who saw them would realize that such a precision of lashing could have been given only to a heretic. They might even have recalled the red-haired bride of Satan, for whom the witch hunters had searched Perugia since the previous spring. It was evening when we arrived at the house of the high heir. The track to it was very rough, winding up through a growth of stunted pines. The house was of one story, set on a natural terrace in the hillside. It was plastered white, frescoed with a design of formal vines, and the roof tiles were the colour of red earth. It was very different from the Perugian house. Instead of hangings of tapestry or gilded leather, there were plain walls, and the blue curtains were bordered with a flower pattern and faded wools, poppies and ears of wheat and marguerites. The tiled floors were bare. The chests and tables and the long benches were like those I had seen in the house of a prosperous farmer when Petruchio and I had played there for a wedding. After I had rested, I went out to join Carlos on the paved terrace in front of the house. On three sides of it there was a vine pergola in the form of a cloister. Below us the ground sloped steeply. Some white goats were feeding on the crisp pasture, and their bells echoed up to us as they moved. It was here that Carlos told me the story of his first wife, Lalage. In the days when my parents were still alive, their household was maintained in a state usual to noble families of the time. My mother, as I have already told you, was Spanish, and she possessed, as do many of her countrymen, a taste for plotting. I think that without her encouragement my father would have been content in his riches, but she turned him from a kindly man into a disappointed aspirant for power. The house was dark with intrigue, and the people who were welcome to it were not chosen for their qualities of friendship, but for the weight of their influence. I would have found my companions in painters and musicians, but such a choice was considered unworthy of a Ludovici. My mother thought that for a young man of my position to wish to be a poet was as though I shamed her by blackening my face, and carried round a comfit box like a Negro page. To escape from this stifling environment, I travelled widely, but while at home I tried to adjust myself to their standards of behaviour. I became famous for the elegance of my dress, and no fashion was introduced from abroad that I was not among the first to wear. I was seldom defeated in the tilt-yard, yet none guessed that my manner was heavier to wear than any armour I put on to joust. It was remarked that I was indifferent to women, but that was ascribed to my facetiousness or to a liking for less credible adventures. My companions would have been bewildered if they had known that when I went hawking, it was not the power of the falcon I shared, but the pigeon's death. If they had known that when I rode against Milan beyond the trumpets of the charge, I heard the cries of the dying echo, the chink of mercenaries' gold. My mother endeavoured to extend her influence even to choosing a wife for me, trying to tempt my senses with a daughter of a house with whom she hoped to make a suitable alliance. I could not forestall her disappointment. Keys and the Buddha. Who? Oh. going to stop it. My mother endeavoured to extend her influence even to choosing a wife for me, trying to tempt my senses with a daughter of a house with whom she hoped to make a suitable alliance. I could not forestall her disappointment by telling her that I saw only their blackened teeth and the pockmarks under their lard. When I was 25, I had an inheritance from a great uncle, and with it I built this house, where at times I could escape to live as a man, not a puppet. I let it be known that I was building it, but gave no clue to its position. Even my mother made no protest, for it was soon rumoured that I lodged my mistress here, and this did much to calm her doubts of me. I kept 3 servants, and this house became a place where poets or artists who had no patron could work undisturbed by their anxieties of bread or lodging. It soon became known among their fraternity that even when I was not in residence, they would be welcome, so I often played host to men I had never seen. I was 34 when I returned to find a painter living here. With him was his model, a girl of 18 whom he had got with child. Less, so he told me, from a desire to take her, than because he wished to see her with a more fruitful curve to her belly, as inspiration for a masterpiece of the goddess of summer. She was an incident in his craft, no more important than the selection of a panel or the blending of pigments. When the picture was finished, he went away, but she stayed on. The servants accepted her as one of themselves, as did I, and when I heard that her child was born, I sent word that he was to be my godson, choosing for him the name Alcestis. Until 2 years later I never saw him, for I was out of Italy, and when I returned I had almost forgotten they might still be there. As I rode up the hill I saw a woman carrying a laughing child on her shoulders. I drew rein to watch them. They were both garlanded with marguerites, and they looked strong and beautiful, rich as the earth. I felt my slow pulses stir. In her I saw embodied so many things I had once hoped for. To sit by a hearth where wood I had chopped was burning, to drink wine from grapes which I myself had planted, and at my side a woman from whom I need not hide my heart. There was a strength about Lalage I had never seen in other women. Her hair was wheat gold, fragrant as warm hay. Her skin was unblemished, and her eyes were calm as water. Her thoughts flowed placidly as a summer river, and there was a stillness about her like the sound of corn growing. I loved her as I had once dreamt of love, for she was gentle as milk and honest as bread when you are hungry. Soon we were married, and at my parents' death I took her to Perugia. For a time we lived there, finding contentment even among the uneasy memories of my youth. New friends, now friends, sat at my table, dining with laughter in good company, in that great room where once intrigues were brewed. But the gods must have been jealous of such happiness, for when my son was born, Lalage died with him. Thereafter I lived alone with the boy Alcestis. He was not like his mother, who had loved the earth. It was as if he had been born in fealty to the sea. He was always talking of ships, and would evade his tutors to pore over an old folio of charts. I longed to keep him with me, but I had learned that each man must be free to set his course by his own star. So Alcestis became skilled in seamanship. I gave him a vessel, built to his own design. He called her the Crimson Rose. Sometimes a year, 2 years go by before I see him. I was in sorrow for him on the night you found my door, for it was only 3 days since he had set out on a perilous voyage to where men say the sea falls into space beyond the new land. I finished this here. The next is called Statue of Apollo. Apologize for the interruption.